But their plans were ruined once again, as the Quran says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وَمَكَرُوا وَمَكَرَ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهُ خَيْرٌ مَاكِرِينَ. And they plan, and Allah also plans, and Allah is the best of planners. Well, you see, defeating Saddam wasn't going to be so easy, since America had already invaded Afghanistan, so they already had their troops and their military forces in Afghanistan at that time. And Iran wasn't going to directly help America in the invasion because they didn't want Iran to be fully exposed. That was actually one of the main points of invading Iraq, because aside from removing Saddam Hussein from power, it was to have this fake drama where America invades Iraq on their own, and then Russia and Iran would come in and defeat the Americans. And thereby, Iran can once again be portrayed as being independent and Islamic and make people forget all about what happened in Afghanistan, especially since the media wasn't allowed to cover the news in Afghanistan. And as I said, the American military acted very ferociously and very mercilessly towards the reporters in Afghanistan. We hear some of the horrible things that happened to reporters in Iraq, but we don't even hear about what happened in Afghanistan. It was much, much worse in Afghanistan. It was so bad in Afghanistan that's why you don't hear about it, because they actually they went in and massacred the reporters, the real journalists. They just massacred them. They just bombed their entire buildings. It wasn't like in Iraq where they would shoot one guy or bomb one guy. In Afghanistan, there was a total censorship of the events and the war that was going on, because it was completely ruining their narrative, you see. And so they thought that they could bring back their old narrative, their old 1980s, 1990s narrative, by invading Iraq and have Iran pretend to defeat America. And this is why, if you watch Michael Moore's Fahrenheit 9/11, which he made during the early days of the Iraq War, he kept insisting that America had invaded Iraq all alone without the help of other countries. And he also never ever mentioned the involvement of Iran and Russia in his entire documentary or even in his other documentaries. Even though Iran was the number one country that helped America more than any other country, it was Iran that was directly, because Iran and Iraq are neighbors. So, and Iran actually sent militias, soldiers to help America, but this was never mentioned by these famous documentaries and about the Iraq War, especially especially the ones that you hear the most about, the ones that you see the most on TV and on the news. They tried very hard to cover this up, and in fact, originally they didn't even want Iran to send soldiers to Iraq to help America. It was only going to be the American military and maybe a few other countries such as Britain and a few other countries. But it was mainly going to be America. That was the plan. And that's what we see in Fahrenheit 9/11. We see Michael Moore complaining that, oh, how come no one else helped America? It's all George Bush's fault for acting alone. And at that time, they thought that they were going to accomplish this plan. You see, that's why they hired Michael Moore to make this documentary. That's why they allowed him to make this documentary, because the next part of the plan was that Russia and Iran were going to come in and defeat America, supposedly.
Who's in that coalition of the willing now?
You will find out who's in the coalition of the willing.
The coalition of the willing. The Republic of Costa Rica. The Republic of Iceland.
Of course, none of these countries has an army or, for that matter, weapons. So it looked like we'd be doing most of the invading stuff ourselves. But then there was also
Romania, the Kingdom of Morocco.
Morocco wasn't officially a member of the coalition, but according to one report, they did offer to send 2,000 monkeys to help detonate landmines.
فاسأل العميل الصهيوني الأمريكي جلال الطالباني عن فرقة الاغتيالات التابعة للموساد التي تسكن في شارع العدنانية في وسط كركوك.
Of course, I'm not blaming Michael Moore alone. This was the narrative of most of the media back then, especially the liberals in the media. that Bush had supposedly acted on his own instead of cooperating with the United Nations and other countries. And then the Democrats were going to come and fix things by making America more internationalist and more of a global UN New World Order system, which really just means more censorship and more control over the population, as all these governments are already part of the one world government controlled from Hyperborea. In fact, even the UN took part directly in the invasion of Iraq. The UN itself actually helped America invade Iraq. But they just said on the media that they were against the occupation. As did the Catholic Church and Russia. They all played this role of pretending to be against the invasion. So originally, they didn't want Iran and the Shias to join the American military and directly invade Iraq together, as that would have completely ruined their narrative. And that was the whole point of invading Iraq. It was to push this narrative. It was to bring back the Iran versus America fake narrative. And at the same time, they had another problem. You see, Hikmatyar and his militias had nothing to do, and those extremists who were connected to Hikmatyar, such as Zarguwi's faction and many other subgroups, were now fighting alongside Mullah Muhammad Omar and the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan against the American military and against the Northern Alliance or new Afghan government, and of course against Iran's Quds Force. And that's right, by the way, Qasem Soleimani's group, the Quds Force of Qasem Soleimani, the guy who was supposedly killed by America recently, his group was fighting for America in Afghanistan. They were part of the occupation of Afghanistan. They were fighting against Mullah Omar. They were fighting for America and the UN and Israel and NATO. And due to the new unity between the Arab Salafi Mujahideen such as Zarguwi with the Afghan Hanafi Mujahideen, the Taliban, the Islamic Emirates, I should say. Because of this new unity between the Salafis and the Hanafis, the Salafi Sunnis and the Hanafi Sunnis, Iran and America and the rest of their allies were all losing badly in this war. That's why the media rarely even bothered to report what was going on in Afghanistan, except a few small lies now and then. But they never went into detail about the war. In fact, America even bombed Al Jazeera's buildings in Afghanistan and prevented real journalists from even traveling there, as they wanted to prevent any real news from leaving Afghanistan. And even the few real journalists that went there, their movements were totally controlled. They were made to, interview the fake Taliban, such as the TTP, Hikmatyar's men. There are videos actually where there are journalists going to Afghanistan and they're interviewing Hikmatyar's militias, and they call them Taliban and Al-Qaeda. But they're interviewing the militias of Gulbuddin Hikmatyar. They're interviewing, the TTP and Hikmatyar's militias, but they say we're interviewing Al-Qaeda. And this goes to show that this fake Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan are just Gulbuddin Hikmatyar's men. So what were the Zionists to do? Well, they tried to kill two birds with one stone. On the one hand, they wanted to weaken Saddam Hussein so that America could later come in and easily defeat him without direct help from Iran and Russia and many other countries. And on the other hand, they wanted the Salafis to stop helping Mullah Omar and killing American and Iranian soldiers in Afghanistan. They wanted to stop the Salafis from weakening the occupation forces, so that Mullah Omar and the Hanafi Mujahideen, the Islamic Emirate, would be all alone, without any allies. So then, that's why Gulbuddin Hikmatyar, who was in Iran at that time, he started sending his men to fight in Iraq and wage jihad against Saddam Hussein. You see, his men had nothing to do. They were like, didn't we join your group to form an Islamic government and to do jihad? Why are we living in Iran? Why are we doing nothing in Afghanistan? What should we do? And Gulbuddin Hikmatyar sent them off to fight in Iraq against Saddam. That's right. They never told you this on TV, did they? Not even one TV channel, not even a single TV channel told you about this. And that's what happened. That's what actually happened. Hikmatyar ordered his men to leave Iran and Afghanistan and to wage jihad against the liberal, secular Saddam Hussein. One of these subgroups, as I said, was headed by Zarguwi. But of course, there were many other groups, there were many other subgroups that were indirectly controlled by Iran through Gulbuddin Hikmatyar, who in turn controlled these Salafis. And these people were brainwashed into focusing all their hatred towards less religious Sunnis, such as Saddam Hussein. And before that, it was Ahmad Shah Massoud. Although Ahmad Shah Massoud was a total fake, Saddam was a real secular Sunni, non-religious Sunni. And one of these men, aside from Zarguwi, one of these men that was working for Gulbuddin Hikmatyar and who was indirectly therefore controlled by Iran, was called Omar Hadid. And he was one of the first to incite rebellion against Saddam in 1999, as ordered by Gulbuddin Hikmatyar. That's right, Iran and America were indirectly using Salafi extremists to fight against Saddam Hussein just before America invaded Iraq in 2003. Omar Hadid was just one of them. There was also Abu Anas al-Shami, who was born in Kuwait. Yet, instead of fighting against the government of Kuwait, the Zionist government of Kuwait and the American military, who have been there since the early 1990s, since the Gulf War, instead of fighting against these apostate governments and these kuffar and these American soldiers, Abu Anas al-Shami instead left Kuwait and went to Iraq to attack Saddam Hussein, the enemy of Kuwait. Remember, Saddam was against America and Kuwait. Yet these Salafi extremists were leaving their countries to go to Iraq to attack Saddam Hussein. Why were they doing this? You can clearly see that these people were directly, or in some cases indirectly, serving the Zionist Illuminati agenda. These men were known to be very extreme, and they started off by attacking Iraqi civilians for not being religious enough. And strangely, they began doing this right as Saddam started becoming more religious and even formed pro-Salafi militias inside Iraq. So clearly they were being used to stop Saddam from abandoning nationalism and becoming more religious and gaining the sympathy of the Ahlus Sunnah, right as the American military were getting ready to invade Iraq with the help of the Shias. So they were trying to create division between Saddam and the religious Sunnis, especially the extremist Salafis. Now again, let's think about this. These people used to attack civilians in Iraq for going to the cinema, or for not wearing hijab, or for drinking alcohol. Yet they weren't attacking the government of Kuwait, which is completely 100% Zionist and under America's direct control. Instead of killing the American soldiers inside Kuwait, or at least trying to attack Israel like Zarguwi did, like Zarguwi tried several times, they instead were attacking the Sunni Saddam. They weren't attacking the Shias of Iran or the pro-Iran anti-Saddam Shia militias in Iraq, such as Muqtada al-Sadr. No, they were focused on attacking Saddam Hussein just a few years before America invaded Iraq. So we can clearly see that these extremist Salafi leaders were being used directly by Gulbuddin Hikmatyar and indirectly by the Zionist Shias, as everything they did benefited the Shias and Iran and America. But what was even more important was for Hikmatyar to send Zarguwi to Iraq, because firstly, Zarguwi was fighting against the occupation in Afghanistan, and the Zionists didn't want the occupation forces to be weakened or defeated, but also because the shayateen, the devils, they know that Zarguwi is the real Mahdi. And if you watch my past videos, you know that this means that the fitrah of the people is inclined toward Zarguwi. So if they could get this man to wage jihad against Saddam Hussein, many other Muslims were also going to join him due to their fitrah inclination. In fact, this is why they hid the fact that Hikmatyar was indirectly controlling Zarguwi. They didn't want people to know that Iran was behind the Salafi jihad against Saddam, as that would firstly not appeal to the fitrah, and secondly it would be very questionable and suspicious for people who identify as Salafi extremists to be fighting against the Sunni Saddam with the help, or worse, under the leadership of Shia Iran and their agent Hikmatyar. So they had to avoid suspicion by using Salafis, as Salafism is perceived as being strongly opposed to Shiism. Several years ago, I made a video where I said that Zarguwi was being deceived. However, I now believe that Zarguwi actually knew what was going on. In other words, I believe that Zarguwi was pretending to be going along with Gulbuddin Hikmatyar's plans and pretending to be deceived by Hikmatyar and Iran, so that they would let him be the apparent leader of this extremist Salafi group known as Tawheed wal Jihad. You see, because as I said, they didn't want the Salafis to know that Hikmatyar and Iran were controlling them. But after Zarguwi was sent from Afghanistan to Iran by Hikmatyar, who lived in Iran at the time, and then through Iran they sent them off to Iraq, Zarguwi all of a sudden took full control over these brainwashed Salafi suicide bombers. And since these extremist Salafis thought that he was their leader, they became his fighters without rebelling against him and without realizing that he actually took over Hikmatyar's group. You see, Zarguwi was supposed to act as a fake leader, as the apparent leader of Tawheed wal Jihad, not the real leader. He was just there to deceive the extremist Salafis so that they wouldn't know that Hikmatyar was the real leader, because Hikmatyar was known to have sold out to Iran. He was actually living in Iran. So in order to prevent these extremist Salafis from knowing that the pro-Shia Gulbuddin Hikmatyar was controlling them, they were using the image of Zarguwi. But when Zarguwi was sent to Iraq, he actually made himself not the fake leader, but the real leader of Tawheed wal Jihad. And it's interesting, they tried similar things to me with me. They tried to make me become a fake leader of certain groups several times, and as I explained on my Soothsayers Conspiracy video series. Although I totally rejected it because I don't want to play these political games. But that's how Zarguwi deceived them. You see, as it says in the Quran, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, they conspire and Allah also conspires, and Allah is the best of conspirators. Or as Ali radhiyallahu anhu said, according to Sahih Bukhari, war is deception. But this shouldn't be confused with the Shia concept of taqiyya. War is deception means that we can deceive the deceivers. As the Quran says, Allah conspires against those who conspire. In other words, Allah makes their own conspiracies backfire on themselves. So we can't lie to Muslims with the excuse that war is deception, but we can lie to someone whom we know for sure is deliberately lying to us and trying to deceive us. And we can pretend like we believe their lies without arguing with them and trying to prove them wrong. Because if you are 100% certain that someone is your enemy and is lying to you, then there is no point in debating with him, as his intention is to harm you, not to learn from you that you know he is lying to you. in fact, if he finds out that that you know that he's lying to you, he might harm you. So that's when we say war is deception. In other words, you can deceive the deceivers, you can trick the liars. You can't deceive ordinary people. You can't lie to ordinary people, but you can deceive the deceivers. You can make their own plans backfire against them. For example, you can infiltrate a spy agency. If you see an evil spy agency, it is permissible to infiltrate them. But you can't infiltrate innocent people and lie to them and deceive them and lie to them about Islam in order to convert them to Islam. That's what Shias do. We don't believe that. And anyway, this is how Zarguwi turned Hikmatyar's deception on its head. Because Iran and Israel were trying to use the image of Zarguwi to appeal to the fitrah of Muslims and thus deceive them into killing other Sunnis. And then once Saddam was weakened and Zarguwi's small group was defeated or destroyed, America would then wage war on the weakened Saddam Hussein and easily defeat him. Or even if Zarguwi won, they could have then attacked Zarguwi, who also would be weakened by then. Although it was more likely that Saddam was going to defeat Zarguwi because Zarguwi only had a few men. But that was the plan, to basically weaken Saddam Hussein using these extremist Salafis right before America would invade Iraq. However, when Zarguwi entered Iraq, when Hikmatyar sent Zarguwi through Iran to Iraq, instead of attacking Saddam Hussein, Zarguwi seems to have made a deal with him behind closed doors, as he knew that America and Iran were secretly plotting to invade Iraq, even though he pretended not to know. He pretended to be one of these crazy extremist Salafis. But so that Hikmatyar would think that he could use him and deceive him and manipulate him. But when he entered Iraq, he actually, behind closed doors, he made a deal with Saddam Hussein. And in fact, during that time, the American government actually used to say that Saddam didn't pose a threat and that they had no intention to invade Iraq. I'm talking about 2002. In 2002, America was saying that we're not going to invade Iraq.
He has not developed any significant capability with respect to weapons of mass destruction. He is unable to project conventional power against his neighbors.
We are able to keep arms from him. His military forces have not been rebuilt.
You see, the reason why Colin Powell said this at that time, just a year before they invaded Iraq, the reason why he said this was because he wanted to deceive the Salafi Mujahideen into thinking that America wasn't going to invade Iraq and that America was actually trying to improve relations with Saddam Hussein if Saddam cooperated with America's WMD inspectors. Remember, back then, America was pretending like they were trying to get along with Saddam and make a new deal with him. Similar to what they're saying about the Taliban, that America is improving their relations with the Taliban in order to get the extremist ISIS to attack the Taliban. Although in this case, the ISIS we see in Afghanistan is completely fake. They're not even controlled. I mean, these people have learned their lesson. They won't let another real person to control them. ISIS in Afghanistan is completely fake. But they want to recruit religious people to join ISIS to attack the Islamic Emirate. That's why on the media they claim that the Islamic Emirate is making peace with America. And so likewise, at that time they were saying that Saddam is trying to improve his relations with America. And this was the narrative during that time, just months before America actually invaded Iraq. So why did this happen? Why did America shamelessly contradict themselves?
Saddam Hussein has the motive and the means and the recklessness and the hatred to threaten the American people. Saddam Hussein will be stopped. Vice President. And we have sources that tell us that Saddam Hussein recently authorized Iraqi field commanders to use chemical weapons. The very weapons the dictator tells the world he does not have.
What do you make of the statement made by the Iraqi government, yesterday that Iraq has no weapons of mass destruction and is not developing any?
They're lying. Next.
The burden remains on Iraq, not on the United Nations, not on the United States. The burden remains on Iraq to cooperate fully and for Iraq to prove to the international community whether it does or does not have weapons of mass destruction. We are convinced they do until they prove to us otherwise.
Are they lying about one, both?
No, they have them and they continue to develop them, and they've weaponized chemical weapons. We know that. They've had an active program to develop nuclear weapons. It's also clear that they are actively developing biological weapons. I don't know what other kinds of weapons would fall under the rubric of weapons of mass destruction, but if there are more, I suspect they're working on them as well, even though I don't happen to know what they are.
So why did this happen? Why did America shamelessly contradict themselves? You see, because Zarguwi pretended like he believed this narrative. But once he entered Iraq, he stopped the Salafi Mujahideen in Iraq from continuing to attack Saddam Hussein after he became their leader. And when this happened, the American government all of a sudden went crazy. They went mad. Suddenly, the American politicians, including Colin Powell himself, completely changed their tone about Iraq and about Saddam Hussein, and they started to stress how important it is to invade Iraq, and we have so much evidence that he has WMDs and he's hiding bombs all over the country, in north, in the south, in the east, in the west. They were putting so much pressure to make people forget about what they said before. All of a sudden they were saying Saddam's got WMDs, he's got weapons of mass destruction. They were even saying that he has nuclear weapons, nuclear bombs. So they're making accusations after accusations against him because they wanted to totally change their own narrative. Colin Powell mentioned the fact, he even mentioned the fact that Zarguwi had joined Saddam Hussein. He said that the extremist Abu Musab al-Zarguwi has joined forces with Saddam Hussein, which was actually true. Some people say that part of what Colin Powell said wasn't true, but that was actually true. But of course, what he didn't tell you is that America and Iran themselves had indirectly sent him to Iraq to attack and weaken Saddam. But instead of attacking Saddam, he had joined him. He didn't tell you that part. He just told you that the extremist Zarguwi went to Iraq. Okay, how did he go there? From Afghanistan. How did Zarguwi go to Iraq from Afghanistan? They themselves, Iran and America themselves, sent him there to attack Saddam right before they were going to invade Iraq. That is why now Iran was forced to send their soldiers and militias to fight alongside the American military to invade Iraq, despite pretending to be America's enemy, because Saddam had now become stronger thanks to his new Salafi allies. You see, so their whole plan backfired. That's why they cancelled their old plan. You see, their old plan was that they were going to wait for Saddam and the Salafis to fight each other and kill each other, and after several years of Salafis fighting against Saddam, then they were going to invade Iraq. But the reason why they had to change their whole rhetoric so quickly, and they also had to have Iran directly help America invade Iraq, was because not only had Saddam Hussein not been weakened, he had actually got stronger. And the American military was already fighting in Afghanistan, so they couldn't invade Iraq all alone. And now they had to really invade Iraq all alone if Zarguwi wasn't going to indirectly help them weaken Saddam. So they were going to get into a lot of trouble. There was no way that they could defeat Saddam Hussein so easily if Iran and other countries didn't help them. So instead, Iran did help them. Iran directly helped America invade Iraq, as did many other countries. They just didn't talk about it on the media. But they didn't deny it either. They didn't deny that Iran's forces were in Iraq. They simply didn't talk about it. They simply didn't report on it. But they couldn't deny it because there were thousands of Shia and Iraqis and Shia Iraqis and Iranian soldiers in Iraq fighting for America. So they couldn't say that no, Iran isn't helping in the occupation. They just wouldn't talk about this issue, and instead they would just focus on fake stories such as Iran producing nuclear bombs, Ahmadinejad is making nuclear bombs, oh no, Iran is denying the Holocaust, oh no, Ahmadinejad is doing this, he's helping the Palestinians, oh no, Ahmadinejad is planning to attack Israel, oh no, Israel and America are planning to attack Iran. And none of this garbage ever happened. And I used to write countless articles on islamicity.com back then in 2006 and 2007 telling people that none of this is ever going to happen. And as we saw, after all these years, nothing happened. Ahmadinejad remained president for both his terms, for 8 years, for both his terms. And none of these things that the media was focusing on happened. And all this garbage on the media was to take attention away from the fact that Iran was directly helping America invade Iraq. So they were trying to hide this fact, and they desperately needed Iran to help them because Iran and Iraq share a huge border. And so they really needed Iran's direct help to invade Iraq. So they decided to do it anyway, just like in Afghanistan, and simply not report on it, simply not mention it on the media.
توجه بفرمایید. البته بله، مرگ بر آمریکا، چون آمریکا اون عامل اصلی این فشارهاست. خودشون هم اصرار دارن بر اینکه متمرکز بشوند روی اقتصاد ملت عزیز ما. هدفهای آمریکا در مسائل منطقی درست نقطه مقابل هدفهای ماست.
وحدت ما 35 سال است در جمهوری اسلامی این فریاد رو داریم میزنیم، فقط هم نمیگوییم، عمل میکنیم. کمکی که جمهوری اسلامی به برادران خود در دنیای اسلام تا امروز کرده است، اغلب کمکی بوده است که به برادران اهل سنت کرده است. ما در کنار فلسطینی ها ایستادیم، در کنار مردم مؤمن کشورهای منطقه ایستادیم، چون میدانستیم مسئله وحدت امروز در رأس مسائل اسلامی است. من توصیه میکنم، اصرار میکنم به علمای اعلام، به روشنفکران دنیای اسلام، به سیاستمداران دنیای اسلام اینقدر دم از تفرقه نزنند.
البته بله، مرگ بر آمریکا.